Super.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. So, as it is on the dot, I wanted to welcome anybody who has currently joined, and I know people will be joining still. My name is Margot Waldorf, and I am the person that is a little bit behind the Change Awards. And Anne obviously is one of our winners. And we are extremely, extremely happy that she has decided to share with us her experience about this particular project that won and share with you this experience as well. So bear with me as I share my screen briefly and um, get you to see the name of the session. Um, okay, bear with me. Okay. So, the name of the session today is Leading Beyond Yourself, Designing Organizations that Thrive Through Change. Personally, I think this is quite important to always look at yourself as the only person that you can actually change really very well if you wanted to. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Anne and how did she do this. Just before we start, I also say that there is a Q&A session at the end of this. So if you have any questions, I would kindly ask you to put them in the little question box. I will be managing those questions. So then Anne has the flow and she can describe anything she wants to say to us without bigger interruptions. And then we have the questions and we can answer the questions at the end. Also, before I hand over to Anne, I wanted to say big thank you to our sponsors. We've got Investigo, we've got Grace, big sponsors of the Change Awards, and we wanted to give them a big shout out for being with us and supporting us through many years. So super grateful for that. Right, in that case, I'm going to go back to my screen and stop sharing um, and hand it over to Anne. And yeah, any questions, uh, just let us know. We'll be monitoring the questions in the chat box. So, Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Margot. It's really an honor to be here, and especially to have been recognized by Change Awards with as the 2025 runner-up for Best Independent Consultant. That's been a real win for me this year. Um, and so the work I'll be talking about, basically, I work with leaders, professionals, and organizations. Um, and this work is anchored in the human experience and it bridges between personal growth and organizational evolution. And what I've done is I've framed it around four key pillars of awareness, alignment, activation, and adaptation. And that's what I will be bringing us into over the next short while. Now, to just start off with, let me just share my screen. And I think it's always helpful to share the theory behind the work that I have been doing. And I really and love, let me put it that way, John Cotter's work. And so I want to start off by defining change and transformation the way he does. And basically, he gives us a very helpful way of looking at change as adjustment, improvement within an existing system that is often incremental but limited in scope. And this looks like your processes, it looks like your structures or behavior. And then when we look at transformation, this has to do with deep fundamental shifts that reshapes how people think, how they feel, and how they actually act. And looking at the leader, looking at the organization from a lens of what they are becoming, which I think is really good because it's dynamic. And so, what I've tried to do is have this model show us the dynamism of transformation by having a wave. And then within change, you can see there are many different things that might be happening, um, at any one point. And when you look at the concept of transformation, it's important to recognize it needs both logic and also emotion. When we talk about logic, we're looking at facts, figures, analysis. When we look at emotion, we're looking at urgency, we're looking at vision, we're looking at shared belief. And I love this allegory that John Cotter has in Our Iceberg is Melting, which shows this really well because you have the penguins who are threatened with their home basically breaking up because the iceberg is melting. But what's fascinating is that the data may have been convincing, but that was not what got them to move. They moved because they felt the urgency. They moved because they came to a place of shared vision and began to believe in one another. And so this is the lens through which I will take us through the work I did. And I have found that when we look at change, especially looking at the definition I've just given, you'll find that change improves the current state, but when we're looking at transformation, we're actually creating a new future. So these two are happening concurrently. I have learned over the years that people do not transform because they understand the case for the change. They actually transform because something inside them shifts. And, the mind always needs clarity, but the heart needs meaning. And so when change appeals to the mind, I find that what you get is compliance. But and there's nothing wrong with that, let me say that. But if we can have people move from compliance to commitment, then you will find that we're winning. And how you do that is by really appealing to the heart. And that's where the transformational work happens. And so the case study that I presented to Change Awards had to do with there were actually three different businesses, but two of them I can collapse into one framework. But basically, let's look at the leaders in different industries. One was running a business that had hit a ceiling. So staff were leaving, growth was stagnant, and everything rested on the founder. The second one was running a professional firm. The founder wanted to move away from daily running of the business for personal reasons, but the business still depended on their daily decisions and direct client relationships. Now, these are different enterprises, but they have the same issue. Both are deeply dependent on the leaders. And the dependency was actually the greatest barrier to their growth. So it's a common challenge when looking at leadership, looking at culture and operations that are dependent on a single person. You will find that there'll be a curtailing of growth. Um, it's not the most efficient way to go, right? And so the opportunity was clear to come alongside the leaders to build their businesses strategically with some level of cultural architecture for resilience and sustainable, and for the businesses to be sustainable beyond themselves. So they also wanted the businesses to be aligned with a lifestyle that they wanted to have. Because I remember one saying, you know what, I've been running this business for so long, it's not sustainable. There's got to be more to my life than this. And so that's what I'm going to take us into now in terms of what we did. And so enter in, we have these clients, these leaders, and my work centered around cultivating clarity, confidence, and courage. What I realized is that when we are not clear, it's really difficult to move in the direction we want to move in because there's all sorts of things we could be doing, and that's how we get into shiny object syndrome, because there's lots of things and we're not very clear. And so what we began to do was work on what their vision was and what their values were. This is something they had set out to do many years ago when they set up the business. But I'm sure you do all agree that we get into the busyness of the business and forget why we set out to do what we started off doing. And so clarity was created. And it was not just to define the business goals, but the lifestyle and impact that the leader actually wanted this work to support because they had realized over time it wasn't sustainable. And so that looked like us having regular sessions that provided a safe environment to explore strategic and core concepts. Why I bring in the space of the safety element is because leadership is a really lonely place, and many times it's one doesn't feel safe just sharing stuff. And so that was really important that I create that space so that we could explore the different aspects that were potential to helping them attain what they wanted. Then we also had deep reflective, self-reflective work that they went on to do in between our sessions. And the idea was to anchor the things that were emerging through our one-on-one sessions. It was also to anchor the scenario mapping we were doing because it's in that deep reflective work that awareness is created, awareness of the system in its entirety, and then alignment that's required for coherence. Because if you're not aware, then what are you aligning to? If you're aware, what point is it if you don't actually have alignment? And so that was a key leadership role. And so what that then did is it brought the leader to a place where um, they could move away from doing everything to a place of focusing on strategy, focusing on actually leading, and focusing on the culture. Some of the symptoms of vision, them drifting away from vision were simple things like uncertainty, which we do see in organizations, disengagement by people. But these were not the real problems. These were just symptomatic of the deeper issues. Um, and what began actually to happen is the leaders were now able to tag their decision making to the vision and also to the values. So then that again was part of the alignment work. So that was the first thing. The second thing had to do with their teams. Their teams began to become strengthened. They began to get confident, confident enough to execute their work. This came about because roles were clarified. It was no longer those situations where people are just getting along with what's next. They sat down and actually clarified what their roles were. And this was really good because it then helped them, first of all, understand the jurisdiction of decision making. And so they could make decisions at their level without having to revert back to the leader for every small thing. And because systems were also set up, these helped with accountability and also helped with collaboration because now everyone sort of knows this is my space, this is what's expected of me. And so they are not insecure, but are happy to collaborate with their team members. At the same time, there was a reviewing of the lived culture. That was really important. I say lived culture because I'm sure you do realize many times the culture we think exists in an organization is very different from what the people within the organization are experiencing. And so there was work around that to ensure that it supported the organizational goals. And so this then meant that as there was a gradual implementation within the business, the team were actually brought along. And you see what happens when you bring a team along, there's a sense of ownership that they have. And so they then became the implementers of the change and they began to activate the insights that had come up and turn these insights into action. And so that was really key. The other thing was there was a buy-in. There was buy-in from key team members who had been nurtured, and they then were able to facilitate the adaptation, the moving now into this new way of being, the transformation into the new future. And so there was established processes being put in place. There was now different rhythms that allowed for strategic delegation, that allowed for the operationalizing of systems that allowed for efficiency and also for resilience. And with the cultural architecture, this was really important. Why? Because whenever an organization is going through any form of change, it's a really fragile time. And so the architecture supporting the culture then helped people feel that they belonged, that there was everything was going to be um okay. I say that loosely because not everything was necessarily going to be okay, but there's that sense of feeling, yeah, we are in a culture that cares. And so the transformation was not just about business performance, it had to do with strengthening the people, strengthening the culture, and strengthening the relationships across the different teams. And so the third and last key pillar was to do with the leaders themselves. So they mustered courage to go away on vacation or on a short sabbatical. And this was something we mapped out right at the beginning. They had to agree to that because this then allowed for a time of testing the systems to see if they worked and allowing gaps to emerge that could then be fixed. Because remember, ultimately, the idea is that the business, the organization should not depend on the leader. And so it wasn't one big transformational moment. No, it wasn't. But rather it was a journey with a series of consistent wins that built momentum. And so you find that, the clarity came around the whole bit of, shared vision and values. The confidence came around the lived culture being looked at, and the courage came when there was trust being developed. Now, one of the things I remember with one particular organization was during this time, some of the shifts that took place, especially to inform the culture, was having team retreats away from the business so that they were, new things were being introduced or being reframed. I remember one of them had to do with their job descriptions. It had been something that had been discussed for years and years, but this was a good time for them to sit down and talk about it, and interact with it and understand what was going on. And so a lot of this work was sort of like an ebb and flow building in, and work was still going on, by the way. So that was, yeah, so that was the gist of what primarily took place with those cases. I don't know if I can. Let me go ahead and just share some of the outcomes, okay? Before we get into questions, let me just share some of the outcomes, some of the observations that I hope can be helpful. Uh, so this is the thing. Leaders don't let go when processes are perfect. They only let go when they can trust others. And this is what was evident here, that as trust grew, they were able to let go. The other thing was that teams stepped up not because their roles were documented, that wasn't the only reason, but it was because they began to feel valued. So there was clarity and there was a sense of feeling valued. And ultimately, what you'll find is organizations become resilient, not when the strategy is stated and finalized, but when there's a way in which the vision and the values can be experienced. I mean, I've had times when I've walked into organizations and you're asking the teams, so what's your vision? And they're like, it's up above the photocopying machine. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about where it becomes alive and people really have this sense of this is why we are here. This is the direction we're taking. And these are the values that frame what we do. And so with the work I did at the time, I observed both operational and human wins. There was the business resilience. Leaders moved from being stuck in operations to running businesses that could thrive without their daily involvement. It's really unfortunate when leaders have to spend their time in operations. That's not the best use of their time. It's better to get people who do operations, then the leader can be more strategic. The other thing is that the teams felt empowered and embraced their roles. And what that, as they were doing that, the confidence they had allowed them to make independent decisions. Many times, what we find is that you're hoping that a team member will make decisions at their level, but because there are no clear boundaries, they then won't do that. Fear takes over rather than them feeling confident enough to speak up. Another issue was to do with clients trusting that they could work with anybody other than the leader of the business. And so, with lots of communication, the clients transitioned from relying solely on the leaders to trusting the wider team, which is a win whenever that can happen. But I think the one I celebrated the most, honestly, was the leader's personal transformation. What happened was the leaders were actually able to say to me, and I have one who particularly keeps coming back to me, and they're like, "Anne, I can't believe it. I've come to a place where I now trust my team." And that has resulted in overwhelm being reduced. And they feel that they're now having a better work-life integration. And one of them, for the first time ever, was able to go away on holiday with their family, and the business continued to run. The other one was able to actually step away from the business for a while and take some really much needed rest some needed rest. And so, yeah, so these are just some of the things that have happened. And what you will find is that staff turnover actually reduces and productivity improves when you can get some this working in this way. I'm not saying in any way that there won't be other problems cropping up, but at least the main things will be working the way they should be working. And so that then becomes helpful. There are a few things that worked well. There's some things that emerged that I can share. And what worked well was anchoring strategy in personal and organizational values, because what this did is it kept motivation alive. Involving teams, I mentioned this early enough, created trust and ownership. And I think I really want to speak to this and say, particularly when an organization is going through a change process, I know oftentimes people feel, no, the structures have changed. This must be done now, now, now. But if you can actually engage your teams earlier and win their trust, they can go on to become your ambassadors, even if they're leaving the organization. And so that's something that I think worked well. The ability for a leader to get a sense of, oh, this is possible, actually reduces the overwhelm and gives way to confidence. Celebrating small wins along the way really reduces resistance, particularly with a team. So you're not giving them this whole big menu to work with. You're giving them small bite-sized things to do and celebrating every point that they get to and they get through. And that then creates motivation and yeah, builds the momentum, builds courage, builds trust because with change, normally the organization hasn't gone there before. So that's important. And yeah, clarity always allows for structured delegation and creation of supportive systems. Emergence, moving too quickly on delegation can cause friction. So a gradual approach always works better. And then the bit about leaders, the leaders actually needing to be taken through a coaching approach because it's not just about strategy. For them to truly let go, it had to do with dealing with mindsets, working around the emotions being expressed and coming up and honoring those. Yeah. Even as we're building the tools and systems. And then the clients also constantly needing the reassurance and the communication to accept new points of contact. I think the highlight in all of this work is that change often will start off on paper, but transformation begins when the hearts and minds are aligned around the shared vision and values, particularly if the values are lived. So that's really something. And strategies and systems create the structure, but the transformation only sticks when people believe it, when people own it, and when people feel that they can live in it. So, yeah, I think generally that's the key. Those are the key things that emerged from that work. And I think I'd like to just say to every leader, my invitation is that you lead not just with strategy, but with heart. Build not just for today, but for a resilient tomorrow. And to do that, you need to shape the organizations in a way that they can thrive in the midst of uncertainty, even as they create lasting impact. And so, thank you very much for listening. And over to you, Margot. Happy to hear any questions that there may be.
So I'm just going to mention that I've seen some people join the session whilst you were talking. So if people have questions, please pop them into the chat. If not, you can also unmute yourself. I have a few questions myself, so allow people to have some time and ask questions if they want. Um, Very, very interesting. And two reflections. Let's tackle number one first. So,
Yes.
what I found very interesting in your work, particularly, is that you are using the, let's say, some of the aspects of the so-called organizational change management, like you said,
Yeah.
Kotter, right? It's a
Yeah.
very well-known work by Mr. Kotter,
Yeah.
and you're using that to help really build organizations which are maybe, let's say, immature in terms of being the organization itself. So
Mm-hmm.
what I have noticed is that, especially if you have a small entrepreneurial organization that
Mm-hmm.
has perhaps been built by organically,
Yes.
somebody's here, oh, they do this, oh, let's get somebody else who does this.
Mm-hmm.
In organizations like these, they do grow, but things like what's our culture? What are our values? So customers are coming, operations are important. In those organizations, if you want to grow, you must go back to those three things that you've mentioned. Would you agree that this is also a very good tool, as in organization change management as a discipline is also a very good tool that could be used to help organizations grow, really?
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely, Margot. And what I have found is a small business will use these and they will work just as well. And I like to say culture, unfortunately, gets a bad rap because we only think about large institutions, large organizations, but culture is all around us. A small business, a medium business, a large culture is important. And so these three key pillars definitely are valid when it comes to
Mhm.
a smaller enterprise. At the same time, my mind went to a larger client, an organization, where I found that I would have expected that they would have had their culture in place,
Mhm.
but these very things were the issues. And
Mhm.
so for me, I sort of use it as a lens, a first level lens to look at what's going on and scope the things that people are not saying. But you're right, yes, they do work across the different size organizations.
Mm. And one lovely thing that you said at the very end, which was that leaders, please do not forget to rule with your heart, because I find it that when I work with organizations, the smaller the organizations, the easier it is to get to the leader and help them rule with their hearts as well. The larger the organizations, the more difficult it is. Did you have any similar
Yeah.
experiences?
Yeah, I have. And the word that popped up just as I heard you say that was, you see, with the larger organizations, the leaders have a lot of unlearning to do.
Mhm.
But I have devised, I've not devised it, but I'll say I've devised a very simple way to deal with that. And I do it through storytelling because
Mhm.
everyone responds to stories. And that quickly helps them get out of their head and move into their heart, and then we can begin to do the work there. But it isn't the easiest. And I think part of it has to do a lot with the different models of leadership that existed,
Mm.
that don't work anymore. And so people learned those and subscribed to those. And now you're saying to them to lead with their heart, and they're like, what are you talking about? Compassionate leadership? We're here to work. And so and I guess this is why I say the coaching model also works when you create those safe spaces then to work with the leaders so that they're able to unlearn in a space of safety and rethink a lot of things that they thought before were cast in stone.
Mm. I love it that you actually started talking about coaching, because another thing that I've noticed when you were talking is that, and I personally have a strong view about what change management truly is. That it actually has different layers and levers and lenses, and one of the lens is that personal change and personal transformation, and I've seen, based on what you were saying, that this is the work that you've utilized as well at your clients. So you did the coaching part, but you also did the organizational part. Do you think that one is able to work without the other, or do you think that it's necessary to have both, or what's your view?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Margaret. So you know what? My work honestly works. I work with both. The personal transformation is critical for the organizational evolution. You can't give what you don't have. And if you're not going to go through that transformation, then you're going to be expecting the team members to carry out something that you don't believe in
Mm.
because you're just instructing, you're not modeling. I don't believe, particularly when it comes to values and culture, that an organization can rise above what's being modeled by the leaders. It's not possible. Yeah, going into organizations, looking at the leaders, saying one thing, expecting another, and the team's just looking and wondering, why are you asking us to do this? Yet what you're doing speaks contrary to what you want, you say the culture should be. And so the two have to go hand in hand. It's really important that they do that. And I think there's no shame in personal transformation as a leader. Why? Living things grow. Where did we hear that leaders should stop growing? We're living, we're alive, so we need to keep growing.
Yeah. Wow, that's really nicely said. And we have a question from Morning Flower. All right. How does an organization have smooth transition for current employees when
Mhm.
pivoting? Because there might be some new ideas that some employees might find uncertain
Yeah.
for themselves in their
Yeah.
roles. So I guess this is to do with, I suppose, we don't know how our role is going to change. I could be negatively impacted, or at least I'm presuming that I could be negatively impacted.
Mhm. So, if you're looking at this particularly from the standpoint of an employee, what I normally will say is that, and this is something I personally believe, if it looks like you may not, you may not be heard, it's important to step back and ask yourself, what is it that I actually need? Is it me or is it the organization? And this is where now you begin to sort of separate. If it's you, then you have to deal with stuff that's making you feel that you cannot contribute to the organization. However, if it's that the organization itself doesn't provide a conducive environment for you to make contribution, then you need to find avenues of addressing that, maybe with your immediate line manager. If there is a system of bringing up suggestions, because this has to do with psychological safety within an organization, then you need to be able to raise that. And I'll say this, over time, people who are innovative, if they continue to remain in an organization that doesn't open itself to contribution, they will not
Mm.
be fulfilled. And so it may be no longer a good fit and time to move on to another place where your ideas, because this is a thing, if we look at organizations as living systems, then you realize that there's the ability to contribute, the ability to fail, the ability to tr do different things, bring up different ideas. And having said that, as Margot was reading that question, the other thought that came up was the whole intergenerational conversation that, we need to be able to bridge generations because each generation brings a strength. And there is no way that you can then have intergeneration, intergenerations coexisting in a space that doesn't open itself up for contribution. So I'm not sure if I've really spoken into it, but I'm happy to go further if that's not what I needed to say.
Yes, I think you were spot on. And
Mhm.
but I wanted to pick up on that intergenerational change and
Mhm.
especially organizations maybe adaptability to this because I've read this interesting article online about the Gen Z not
Mhm.
wanting to effectively not wanting to join the so-called 9 to 5s, not wanting to
Mhm.
be part of any organizations, whatever
Mhm.
the reasons are. Let's put the reasons aside
Yeah.
for now.
Yeah.
But I guess um, my way of thinking behind any change, and going back to
Mhm.
this question, is that people perhaps who come from my generation, we would be scared to lose a job, right?
Yeah.
Because and that's I'm scared because I see that dependency
Yes.
perhaps,
Yes.
and it's okay, of course, yes,
Absolutely.
but
Mhm.
perhaps younger generations wouldn't. And I do wonder, what do you think? Is there any work that bigger players need to do in order to not only attract the young talent, but also keep them in place? And
Yeah.
at the same time, perhaps transition or transform the organization itself
Yes.
so it becomes more like you said, a living organism that is
Yes.
not stuck in the past.
Yes. 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 Absolutely. So the thing that comes to mind is I think it's really important that the older generation take a listening position
Mm.
Listen, don't assume you know why. Ask questions. Be curious. I think if we can come through with curiosity, we do far better than assuming we know why. And as you interact with the younger generation, you probably, from a curious standpoint, will begin to have an understanding of their lens, where they're coming from. I love the concept of perspectives. And the way I look at it is I say, if I stand on this side and look at something in the room,
Mm.
someone standing on this other side looking at the same thing has a different perspective from mine. I'm not wrong and they're not wrong. We're just standing in at different places. And that's what generationality does for us. We stand at different places and therefore see things from a different lens. And if we can begin speaking to one another and listening to one another, we can then come together, and you will find that the wisdom and experience of the older generation can provide a stabilizing factor to the organization, whereas the ability for agility and for adaptation to new ideas from the younger generation will help the organization remain relevant. We've
Mm.
read enough and heard enough of organizations that were doing really well in their time, but you don't hear of them anymore. Why? Because they became irrelevant. And that's why I said even what I did about leaders, you will become irrelevant if you don't continually grow and transform and move towards a new future. And similarly, that is the case within an organization. And I think to your example of 9 to 5, and I just have to say this, allow me to say this. 9 to 5 had to do with the static need for staff, for team members to be supervised.
Mhm.
If you shift to deliverables, it doesn't matter whether I do them in an hour or whether I do them in 8 hours. And so sometimes the thing you're holding on to may just be the thing that's deterring you moving with great momentum forward.
And I really love that because I'm also a person that really works on deliverables and prefers deliverables over 9 to 5. And really, what I would like organizations to perhaps understand and open up, like you say, to something different is allow people deliver what they need to deliver. Do not don't get stuck in this controlling thing. We've worked in different organizations, or at least we've seen many different setups, and it's very interesting when you are from an external person that comes in and looks at what's happening, and you can see that people are bored. And
Yes,
because they need to somehow just do something in order to let the time pass. And this is completely wrong mindset to me. And moreover, it is a mindset that actually kills that curiosity. So kills that relevance.
absolutely.
So I honestly hope that at some point there will be this huge transition of big organizations, to your point, be leading with heart, uh,
Yes,
building together a puzzle, but building it together rather than prescribing the blanket approach for everybody.
agreed, agreed, totally agreed.
Hmm. All right. I'm not sure if there are any other questions. I'm just going to give shout outs to people. Anybody else has any questions? If not, I myself am also out of questions. And frankly, we've spoken for 45 minutes. So everybody deserves a glass of water after that, and especially Anne. Well, oh, well done. Well, I personally wanted to say huge thank you for joining us here at the Change Talks. I also wanted to say that we will have we know obviously the session is being recorded. We will have it available on the website. in the new year, you can expect all of the sessions to be there. So if you haven't had the chance to look at the others, you will be able to look at them. And Anne, I wish you all the best and hope you are going to maybe nominate someone for the Change Awards 2026, or if not, apply yourself.
Thank you very much, Margot. We'll have a good look at it and see what's the best approach. But thank you very much. Appreciate it. And wishing you a restful holiday season.
Thank you. You too. Restful holiday
Yeah.
season and a happy new year.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye bye. Bye
Bye bye
bye.
for now. Thank you, everyone.